Welcome to Night Shadows. I'm Stewart Best, where the paranormal is normal, where that which you thought you knew, you didn't, and where the future can be known if you know exactly where to look. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in and listening. We got a special show tonight. We have Barry Roffman on, who's done a tremendous amount of work on Torah codes. We'd have to consider him absolutely one of the better experts in it. Hi, Barry. How are you doing?
Real well. How are you?
Good. Larry, are you on?
Yes, I'm on, and my landline phone is working, so I'm ready for the show.
Good to hear.
Yeah, you've been out for a while. We have Barry has put up a PowerPoint, PDF type thing, I think it is. And the link to it can be found on Lightgate Blogger on my latest post about the show, and the Lightgate Blogger as well. And if you just click on the link, it'll take you right to it. And Larry, you have one out too on your. What's your address again?
LarryWTaylor.org. Today's blog has that link attached.
Good. Okay. I think probably because of all the work that Barry has done is fascinating stuff, because it relates really to what's going on and possibly the origins of some of this weird novel virus stuff that's happening. Barry, do you want to bring us up to speed, and we'll get on to your PowerPoint thing?
All right. That sounds good. Basically, wait a minute. I'm hearing a feedback over here. Let me take this off here just a second. I should hang up put down the phone because I'm hearing you in two ways. Just a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll get the feedback right now. What do you want me to do?
Say again.
Okay, I was getting feedback over here, like about 5 seconds later. I'm not hearing it right now, so I guess I can go ahead and tell you what happened. All right, we're going to go back to January 26th of this year, and I'm still hearing the feedback on the other. Let me see if I can turn off the sound on my computer. Wait a minute. Hold on a minute. This is annoying. All right, I'll tell you what. Maybe what I'll do is I'll go to this other computer and I'll just use that where I don't think I'm getting the feedback. Let me see. Okay. All right, I'm going to shut this computer down. I hope I'm all right. All right. Sorry about that, everybody.
No problem.
Okay, January 26th, I received an email from a fellow by the name of Craig Ibrahimi. He's a Canadian, and he's from Sook, Canada. Hold on a second. I'm still getting the feedback on this one computer. I'm turning on the other one right now.
Okay.
And
can you speak a little louder too, Barry? We're getting reports in that they can't hear you very well.
Oh, that's not good. Okay. All right. Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Much better.
I hope you okay. All right. So anyway, this Craig Ibrahimi guy called me wrote me on January 26th, and he had some interesting claims. And I'm going to go to the email, even though that's not in it's not the first one over here, but it's on slide 8 for people who managed to find the presentation. And what he writes was, subject extraterrestrial embryo discovered in meteorite, UVic, BC. So it's the University of Victoria, BC. Says, my name is Craig Ibrahimi, research scientist, founder of Deviant Off-World Technology. I didn't like the name. I wanted him to change it right away. He's a weird guy. Barry, would you be interested in the research and biotechnology opportunity of the only pristine extraterrestrial embryo on the planet at the University of Victoria, BC? So that's a rather odd thing, and this was about a day before. I think Larry, it was you who asked me to research the coronavirus, And so these things came in almost simultaneously on my desk, and I started working on the virus to see what I could find out on the codes on that. I'll discuss that later tonight. But in terms of this, I just said, call me. This was, I think, a Friday or so, whatever. So he called me on the weekend, and we had a discussion, and frankly, he made some bizarre claims about having this meteorite, actually a couple of them, and supposedly they had what sounded like a virus on it. There was some life. Sounded like he was talking about embryos in it. And I didn't take him too seriously at first. It took me a while to really figure out there was something more going on here because the claims were so astounding. And, frankly, I'm busy researching the virus, busy looking at the impeachment issues at the time that President Trump was going through that. And so this was a wild claim, but there were 5 PhD scientists that were behind this guy. And as I began to see that, then I began to realize there's a little bit more to what's going on here than I thought. Now, by the way, can I be heard okay by everybody now?
I think so, yes.
Okay. So slide 1 on the presentation shows a map of what was going on. And it shows a little town called Souk in British Columbia. It's on the Straits of Juan de Fuca. And it's probably about 30, 40 minutes away from Victoria. It's west of Victoria. It's about as far south in Canada as you can possibly go and still be in Canada because, right off the beach over there is going to be the Straits, and then on the other side is the state of Washington. So at any rate, he told me that he took the rocks to the University of Victoria. And there they were studied and supposedly identified, at least through ACT Labs, which is supposedly a major lab, identified as extraterrestrial. Nothing was said yet about the character of the so-called embryos that were in them. Now, University of Victoria, in Victoria, you can get a ferry ride from there down into Seattle. There's a ferry that goes back and forth every day. It's the Victoria Clipper. And while I didn't put things together at first, and he was asking me to come out there immediately, and and see the meteorites with my own eyes. I didn't put it together at first, but soon after that, we had the COVID-19 outbreak in Kirkland, Washington. There were 22 people in a nursing home that died there. You may recall that.
Right. Yep.
And initially, when he asked me to fly out there. By the way, I'm going to ask you to excuse me for 1 second. I can still hear my other computer as a back feed, and I'm going to move it out of the room for just a second because it's really bugging me. 1 second.
What do you think, Larry? I think he's working out of his war room.
Yeah, this sounds bizarre. So a meteorite was found.
That's better.
And boy, that's interesting because that is where that's where the breakout occurred, right?
Right. Okay. So I'm saying from Victoria down to Kirkland by ferry is 2 hours and 45 minutes. If you were to drive the whole thing from the Kirkland Life Care Center of Kirkland up to Victoria, it's about a 4 hour and 34-minute trip, but that includes waiting for the ferry to come. Getting from Kirkland into Seattle up, we get on the ferry, take the ferry up, and as I say, about 4 hours, 34 minutes is what's listed over here according to Google Maps. So they weren't that far apart. If you were to measure the air miles, ground miles was 105 miles, air miles about 85 I think, 88, somewhere in that range between the two. So here we have this major outbreak. Now, when Craig first asked me to come out, I wasn't anxious to go because I had flown out to Oakland, California the previous year and came down with a pretty good, flu or cold or something on the plane. And I figured 6 hours or so, whatever it is, to fly up there. I might get sick again. But I also, in the back of my mind, and I told him this immediately, was kind of concerned that he was asking me to come and identify what looked like or what sounded like an extraterrestrial life form. And in terms of any security there for what's a possible biohazard, I wasn't hearing what I wanted to hear. And I thought it might be dangerous to approach the thing, but I did not directly put them together at that time. So anyway, Craig had found the rocks, between March 1st and March the 6th of 2018. So he takes it to the University of Victoria. It's primarily studied by Dr. Elaine Humphrey, and she is on slide 2 on the presentation. Yep. And she's got some impressive credentials with her. She's, it says over here, she's a lab manager and STEM technologist for the new advanced microscope facility. This STEM, S-T-H-E-M, is not to be confused with, science and technology. It's got to do with, the fact that this is a holographic microscope, and it can see inside an atom. In fact, I think it was even capable of seeing inside nuclei. It's like the most powerful microscope in the world. So it's a good place to bring this thing to study. And so, at first, as I said, there's no direct connection between the two, and then I start to realize later. Now, as I started to hear this guy, he was so unbelievable that I insisted on talking to Dr. Humphrey. And I did. And it was maybe a 2-hour conversation or something like that. And she told me some things about the meteorite that were really strange. She wasn't quite ready to come over and say, yes, there's definitely life here. But let me see. On slide 11 of my presentation, I have an item that she put out. It's entitled Faces in the Meteorite. And she writes, Craig Ibrahimi found a special rock when diving underwater with a diamond saw, and she's got pictures. He took off the end to use for analysis and polish the face of the rock in order to prove it was a meteorite. He sent it to a sample to the prestigious Acta Labs for analysis. It came back that this meteorite. The oxygen isotope came back as lunar origin. Now, I don't generally think of the moon as a place with any kind of life or anything like that, but viruses, are simpler, I guess. And in terms of what the whole history of the rock is, it's questionable. She writes, it's a weird rock. The surface face takes away heat and is so cold, water condenses onto it, even after the rock has been in room temperature for months. Looking closely with a hand lens, there's a surprising number of different faces in the grains of the rock. And on the bottom there, she puts her email address, and she had her phone numbers. I think she had her home office. I took that out of the slide because I don't want everybody in the world calling her, driving her crazy. But at any rate, here's a well-known PhD, and she's got a fantastic resume. And she's saying this rock has got faces in it. It's got she's showing what looks like an embryo. And that's what Craig claims that it is, which doesn't mean that much. We're got to get other people to say the same thing. But at any rate, and she's talking about this so-called water condenses onto it. Well, when I looked up some of the properties of viruses in terms of microscopically, it turns out that water condensation is associated with a number of them, that they take, in other words, part of their biological activity, if they're in with something that they can interface with, is to it takes something, I guess, some kind of energy out of the rock, and it winds up that the thing gets cold, and when it gets cold, water condenses. So that's kind of unusual that we months like that. And I mean, normal meteorite does not do anything like that at all. But this suggested to me the possibility that we were dealing with a virus, and she might be right, and he might be right about that. So I'm looking back at some other things over here. At any rate, she takes she's looking at the rock from 2018 early on, and Craig ships a piece of the rock to who she suggested that he sent it to, Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe. That's Wickramasing, and the last two letters HE are silent, at the University of Buckingham in the United Kingdom. And I got a copy of the shipping receipt over here. So I can clearly demonstrate the rock went from Souk to Victoria, Canada, to Professor Wickramasinghe in Buckingham, University of Buckingham in UK. And that's June 18th, 2018, she ships it. So it's going to be there in a couple of days. And now it takes me a while before till a couple of days ago, till I could put everything together. As I was starting to put the PowerPoint together, not only for you guys, but I'm hoping to present it to a congressman very soon. That's in the works right now. My son was David Roffman, who publishes with me. It's normally stuff about the Martian atmosphere. My son was concerned that we could not quite link everything from this Wickramasinghe guy. Let's just call him Mr. Wick. Couldn't get it from Mr. Wick into China, But then there came a paper out that was published, April 1st this year, and it showed 8 names on it, and Mr. Wick was on top, and further down was a fellow from China, and his name is let me get it over here, Jiangquan Ku, Jiangwen for Jiangquan Ku Q-U, and he is from the Department of Infectious Disease Control, Tianjin Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, China. So now, I like to say China like President Trump does. So now I've taken the rock from Souk, and I have it, at least as far as England, and then the guy in England, Mr. Wick, sends it to his home in Sri Lanka. Now, on another paper that I just found was published, actually it was accepted on October 23rd, 2018, accepted November 26, 2018, published December 3rd, 2018. Mr. Wick is the top author of the paper, and it's in a magazine called the Current Virology Current Research. Are we approaching a new influenza pandemic? So this is published in December of 2018. And it's got Mr. Wick on it. It's got the Chinese guy on it, from Shenzhen. Okay, it's not Wuhan, but it's, they do the same kind of thing. They're looking at viruses and diseases and so forth. And we've got both guys together. All right, so now what happens? Time goes by. Mr. Wick got the paper in June of 2018. We fast forward now until May of 2019, May 10th. And at this time, Elaine Humphrey, Dr. Humphrey, is concerned because she hasn't heard a thing from Dr. Wick. So she writes him on May 17th, "Hi, Chandra, I have a client, Craig Ibrahimi, who brought in a meteorite. At first it looked like gabbro, but the chemical analysis by ACT Labs proved to be a meteorite. I understand that he sent you thin samples, outside crust, and a piece of the rock with an embryo in a white circle. I have a very small sample for SEM and EDS. There's a couple kinds of tests there. Craig suggested that if you have finished with the samples, is it possible that you send them to me? Since I'll be in the UK at the end of June, I could pick them up. Best wishes, Elaine." Now, we get a response from him on May 20th. "Dear Elaine, unfortunately, the meteorite package was left in a shed near our house, and it appears to have been stolen. I do not have it anymore. Sorry about that. This, sincerely, Professor Chandra Wiksami, Honorary Professor, University of Buckingham, Honorary Professor, University of Rahuna Matara, Sri Lanka." And then it also says Honorary Professor, Sir John Katawala Defense University, Sri Lanka, and Buckingham Astrobiology. Now, this little school here, Sir John Katawala Defense University in Sri Lanka, I suspected, and it turned out it was the case. It's basically run by the Communist Chinese. In fact, China has been the major arms distributor to Sri Lanka since about 1952. And so the Chinese train all the officers in the Sri Lankan military, Army, Navy, Air Force. And so this is where they would be trained. So now we have the Rock has arrived at a place where it's basically run by the communist Chinese. And here is Chandra coming back and saying, "Oops, sorry, it was stolen." Now, has he, and at any time since the previous year, notified Craig, "Hey, I'm sorry, somebody broke in and stole your meteorite"? No, he is not. This is the first time we hear of it, and she's got to notify Craig of this occurrence. And needless to say, everybody's pretty upset. But, they tried to maintain some civility, but they didn't really understand what they were dealing with. Now, a meteorite, if it was from Mars, would be worth millions of dollars. In this case, coming, she said lunar, but they also thought that it might have come from Vespa, from an asteroid. And that probably is a better possibility because of the water that's involved with Vespa is a lot more than what's involved with the moon. But at any rate, water, ice. At any rate, this is what's going on. So now I start to look at this the Chenjit guy in China, Dr. Kumar, and I see something really extraordinary. In fact, I see in terms of Professor Wick that he published on November 25th, 2019, an article. And it was carried in the press around the world, saying that a pandemic would begin within the next few months. Now, he based that evaluation not on anything that had to do with normal stuff going on down here. It had to do with sunspots and their cycles and when there would be a minimum in sunspots, and the next minimum was 2019, which was about that time. And he tried to argue that it all has to do with sunspots, and that there are, comets out in space that have virus particles. We sweep through their fields. They normally loft down in the atmosphere, with like dust, but they occasionally could come in with a meteorite. And there was a meteorite that landed in China on October 11th, 2019, except for one small problem. I say meteorite. I don't know if it was really a meteorite because no rocks were found. There was nothing found on the ground. It was bright enough to light up the sky at night, and a lot of people took movies of the thing when it came in close. But did it actually impact it to be a meteorite? He doesn't have any evidence from it, nor does anybody else. But he did have in his hands, at least for a year and a half, unless he really was stolen. But he had in his hands Craig's Rock, and Craig's Rock is displaying signs of a virus. So that's what he had. So now he comes out on November the 25th last year. He makes this announcement. It's covered in the press, big newspapers, number of places, number of scientific publications, and then there's another publication in March 2020, Space Weather and Pandemic Warnings. It's published by only two people. One of them is Professor Wick, and the other guy is Q, Jean Quinn. So they come out on November 20th, and it says in the abstract the following. In fact, new viral infections are predictable in a letter entitled Space Weather and Pandemic Warnings, ? To current science published in November 2019. That was the November 25th thing. We, not he, but we explicitly reminded the world that new infective viruses are likely to emerge in the coming months during the lowest minimum of the sunspot cycle in over 100 years, and that public authorities must be vigilant and take necessary action. The emergence of the 2019 coronavirus, in our view, confirms this prediction and highlights the urgency of taking appropriate precautions without further prevarication. Well, how long was it between the November 25th warning and the first person to get sick with the Wuhan virus, or as it was called? 15 days. The first guy who got sick on December the 10th. And so that's when it got going. And so for these guys to come out together after receiving Craig's rock and examining it all they wanted to, I'm sure. And they get stolen. Yeah. For these guys to come out right on the money and say, hey, a virus is coming, and it's going to be, in the first article, they compared it with the Spanish flu. That killed 50 to 100 million people. So it's just too much to ask. Now, the next article that came out on April 1st this year, which was the first one we began, where we caught the relationship between these two guys, and this was closing that gap my son asked for. He wanted to see a link between, in this case, Sri Lanka. How does it get to China? And we see the Chinese professor who's working with this guy in Sri Lanka at a school that's run by the Chinese Army, People's Republic of that's who's running this thing. Oh, there's a connection, And so now there were 8 people on the next article that came out. These were 2. Most of the other professors were at in Sri Lanka, but in terms of who else was there, one of them, Professor Takoro, this guy is in Japan, and I'm trying to see if I can fast forward to find out where I put him. I think he's around slide. He's on slide 15. All right. So the publication included Gensuku Takoro of Institute for Study of Panspermia. Panspermia is the idea that life came to Earth from other planets, or that life from Earth might have gotten to Mars. On whatever, a meteorite impact, an asteroid impact, and that throws a piece of rock out into space at some point, and it travels out between planets. And astroeconomics, Gifu, Japan. Takoro may try to sell any cure developed from Craig's meteorite. Takoro is president and CEO of Kyoto Biopharma Incorporated, and executive director of ISPA. It's a Japanese space agency type thing, I think, or a research group. He lives in Japan. So here we have a man. Craig was talking about selling this thing and making millions or billions of dollars. So now of the 8 people who come to publish together the next month, in April of this year, one of them is the CEO of a biopharma group that can actually make drugs. And so he could be the man that stands to make a fortune, help them make a fortune. They get the patent on the thing. And, of course, the Chinese, allowing all this to go on in a Chinese facility, at least, in Shenzhen, they stand to gain all the military potential that comes from doing something like this. So on slide 16, I just threw pictures of a few ships on here. With the Americans, we had, of course, the Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier, where the crew was heavily infected with the coronavirus, and basically it's out of action. The crew is pretty much offloaded in Guam, and they're going to have to scrub the whole ship, get a whole brand new crew, get it out there, get trained up. And in addition to that, we also had the aircraft carrier Ronald Reagan was forced to dock after crew members were hit by COVID-19. So there's 2 U.S. aircraft carriers out of commission. The French aircraft carrier, or at least has to be cleaned up in a mess, not really operational. The French aircraft carrier, I think it's the Charles de Gaulle, that also has 1,000 people infected, and so it had to return to port, and it's out of commission. Now, we do see on this picture, on slide 16, the Chinese aircraft carrier, Liaoxing. So this aircraft carrier sails through the Straits of Taiwan and out east of Taiwan, where it normally is not. We normally go on the west side of Taiwan. Sails down the coast of Taiwan. I also understand that the Chinese Navy has, in the last days, sunk a Vietnamese fishing vessel. Now, they dispute the waters out there, who owns the South China Sea and so forth. That's been going on for a while. But the idea that, they're free to sink Vietnamese ships because why? Because the American Navy is no longer basically there, at least not with aircraft carriers. So China is really emboldened by this. And then we have the Navy Times coming out on March 22nd. As COVID-19 spreads across fleet, Navy stops identifying ships with positive cases. Why? Because there's so many ships that are getting infected. If you come out and you say it and you tell who it is, then you're saying what your operational status is. And the operational status, the Chinese clearly say, is not ready. So then the South China Morning Post writes, PLA, that's the People's Liberation of Army, that's in other words the communist Chinese over there, flexes military muscle near Taiwan in, quote, in show of COVID-19 control to virus hit U.S. People's Liberation Army resumes drills, including flotilla exercise in the Mekoko Strait. And military observers say China's demonstrating the ability while virus hampers U.S. aircraft carriers. So in terms of what do the Chinese stand to get out of this, well, we can see, obviously, control of the Pacific Ocean is one of their goals. And if they can take out our aircraft carriers with basically what is biological warfare, that's a big thing. Now, there's a little matter of our whole economy getting screwed up. There's a little matter of our food supply being a question at this point. You know, I'm starting to see major meat packers that are closing because of Wuhan virus and so forth. I mean, a lot of people are pretty scared, and they have reason to be, according to what I'm seeing going on. And it's you know, a lot of times I would tend to think in a situation like this, well, you know, I've talked as an Orthodox Jew for years about moving to Israel. Maybe it's a good time to go, except you can't get in Israel because you got to go through a quarantine.
Down for a little bit anyway.
Everybody, they could lock the country down, and not only is that the case, but you want to go anywhere else in the world, it's pretty much the same thing. Of course, we shut down airfare, you know, to Europe and to China and to a lot of other places, and 2/3 of all commercial aircraft in the world are sitting parked. A lot of them out west in California in the desert. You know, they're just not going anywhere. I'm sitting in the second bedroom of my condo here in Cape Canaveral, and most of the time, if I look out the window, I don't see much of anything. Occasionally, I might see a cruise ship sail by because Cape Canaveral is right next to Port Canaveral. But most of the time since this virus began, when I look out the window, there's a cruise ship parked there. I mean, I can hear, if it had the Caribbean music on it normally has, I would hear it. But you know, I see people walking around on it. It's about a block and a half away. It sits right out the window, and our port here in Cape Canaveral, it can have anywhere from 5 or 6 ships in a day right now, and it ain't going anywhere. And then I'll walk down to the beach because we're on the beach, and look out there, and I'll see 3 Disney cruise ships parked there, and maybe 2 or 3 others, and they're not going anywhere. I understand there's like 30 cruise ships parked off in and off Fort Lauderdale, Port Everglades. But you know, the cruise industry is dead. You know, so so many industries are dead. Everybody's closed around the world. It's not just the U.S. China's done this to us. Now, whether or not, you know, originally it was the the Chinese Army developed this on their own, or they got it. They just took what they stole from Craig, basically. You know, and then weaponized it, or spread it out in a very direct fashion. Those are details, but clearly they're up to no good with this thing, and they haven't told us the truth about the casualties that they suffered in China, and they probably don't give a damn. You know, I mean, the Chinese got probably 4 billion people, something like that. I don't know if it's 1.3 or 1.5. It's somewhere in that range. You know,
well, there was a Chinese general who said that they had too many people there, and they're going to have to cull them.
Well, yeah.
That was about 2005.
I mean, I've been to China a couple times. First time I was there, everybody was riding on bicycles, and this was 1990. And there was air pollution in Beijing, but you could see around. And when you went out to the Great Wall, about an hour and a half north of there, it was a fantastic blue sky and a very good view. Then we went back again when I got off active duty at the age of 60, and that was in 2007. And couldn't see a damn thing when you landed. You couldn't see anything in Beijing. It was all smog, absolutely pea soup thick. even at the Great Wall. Could barely see it. Took the train from Beijing through to the border at Mongolia, and there was the Trans-Siberian Railroad on the Moscow. And I couldn't see any sky until about 10 miles before we reached the border with Mongolia in the Mongolian desert. And finally, after the last coal stack, coal burning power plant stack, then we could see that there was something outside the window of the train. So the pollution's horrible. And yeah, this is a way they could figure, okay, no matter how many people we lose, we're still going to have an incredible amount. We lose 300 million people, if we go, let's say even go down to 1 billion people, we still have 3.5 times the population of the U.S.
Yep.
So they don't care. They don't care. And all they care about, like a lot of people, unfortunately, is money and power. And so they devised this plan, or they went along with it. 1.5 years would have been time to get it together. It would not be enough time, in my opinion, and my son's opinion, and we published stuff together, to actually have the virus break out in December, and by April have 8 or 9 PhDs sign on to an article that went through the review process and so forth. And let alone, and that's if they're together, let alone, one of them is in the UK, or a couple are in several in Sri Lanka, you got Japan, you got China. People from all these countries could get together and publish an article this soon, unless they were working on it a long time in advance. And the 2 articles that we have now show how far back this goes, and we can take their coordination back to just after they received the rock from Craig. So what was? Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, we got evidence for here. I mean, this attack is, whether it started with an extraterrestrial virus, which I think there's a good indication it did. Definitely we're under a conscious physical attack by the Chinese, and how our president reacts. I mean, he's got his hands tied with the fact that, let's say, like antibiotics. Our antibiotics are made in China. And we've screwed ourselves over so much by depending on the Chinese for everything, and they don't have our interests at heart at all. So to a certain extent, Trump's got to play catch up in terms of getting things produced here until he can respond. And then the question is what? Because the Chinese, one report recently said that they're making strides in Lop Nor province at their nuclear testing site on new miniaturized nuclear weapons. Now, if we should decide to go after their aircraft carrier or something else, then they probably would want to try to take out our nuclear submarines that might be involved with it. So a lot of dangers in terms of that. Now, who knows about it besides everybody listening to this show? Well, our Defense Department knows about it because they read my site every day. I've mentioned Fort Huachuca many times, and they're on here reading it. And also very closely following it is the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense. I see their IP addresses on here frequently. And in terms of how we can respond, what do I want? And notice, by the way, I haven't discussed Torah codes at all during this. I will later on. But what do we need? I think at a minimum, 2 actions have to be taken, or 3 actions. One is, most of the meteorite that Craig found is at the University of Victoria in British Columbia. That needs to be grabbed by the government, in a proper legal fashion. When I say the government, unfortunately here we're talking about the Canadian government because it's in Canada.
Yep.
So I've mentioned to Fort Huachuca in my emails, haven't heard back a word, but I see them on here all the time, that, hey, there's got to be a Canadian liaison officer sitting out there in Arizona. It's an Army intelligence base. Get this to them and take it up there, and let's do something to grab the rock, or do something, or at least get Craig in for an interview, which has to happen. And anybody else that's come in contact with the rock. Now, there are other people up there that had PhDs there, and one is at Johnson Space Center in Houston in the United States, and other one's at a meteorite center also in the United States in Arizona. These people have had access to samples, but the main rock is up in Canada. So that rock has got to be taken into custody by a responsible authority. It's got to be thoroughly examined. And what I would hope we can get out of that, if we can examine the actual virus, and I'm damn sure it's a virus going to be in that thing, let alone what these things will look like, embryos that are in it too. But if we can get the original virus, even though we supposedly have the sequence of it, we should be able to devise some kind of an antidote of some kind towards it a little bit better. It ought to speed us up a little bit more. We can see, for instance, if we have the original, and then we have samples from around the country, we can get a better idea of how fast it's mutating. The reason we never got a vaccine for the common cold is that it mutates too fast.
Yes.
So we need to know that. We can probably tell a little bit better if anything has been specifically altered or engineered, in order to make it the weapon that it is. And it is a weapon, there's no doubt about it. The next thing that's got to be done is that everybody who's handled the rock, and they're listed on my site, everybody's handle has got to be certainly tested for the coronavirus. But heck, right now I think it's up to a fifth of our country test that they've been infected at some point, and already recovered, made antibodies or whatever. So it's at this point it's pretty common out there. But we just want to make sure that these people have it, and if they do, how did they recover? In Craig's case, this next strange thing I'm going to drop here is that when he handled the rock, he didn't just handle the rock. He claims that he ate some of it. He claims that not only he ate some of it, but I guess it was ground up or whatever, and so did his wife. And he also claims that 3 days after he ate it, he does not tell me what happened to his wife. And 3 days after he ate it, he went bald, temporarily. So he had an effect of this thing. And so we need to know a lot more about that. So I've been trying to get his medical records from the beginning. But when Craig called me or contacted me initially and we first spoke, his idea of contacting me was he was aware of what I wrote with my son about finding primitive life on Mars. In terms of bacteria, cyanobacteria, puffballs, fungi, lichens, and stuff like that. This is all over up there. We've gone into that before. So he thought I could help sell it. But when I heard it as a guy who's a retired war planner, that's what I did. I wrote war plans until I was 60 for the Coast Guard and the Navy. I was concerned about the biological threat hazard, and I still see that right now as a major concern. So I wanted to see his medical records, and he's been reluctant to give me those. A few things I know about him, but he needs to be pulled in for a full physical exam by government authorities to see exactly what's going on there. Now,
what did you find on your Bible codes? Did his name show up?
Oh, yes, it sure did. But before I go to that slide, we'll start with that. It's about the right point in the show. I want to have, if he is still in the UK, I want the UK MOD, the Ministry of Defense, or whoever the proper authorities over there, I want them to pick up this Ramasinghe guy. And I want him questioned intensely, because if he's done what I think he's done, there may be close to 200,000 people dead on the world as a result of it. This is not a light matter. This guy needs to be hauled in and examined thoroughly, and everything has got to be searched that he has to see exactly what he's been up to, and we need a complete record of what he's done with the Chinese and all the whens and wheres and so forth. I got some of the information because Craig sent me some emails. So in some cases, in one case he was very upset because he didn't realize he had some other emails attached to it or in the trail. And from those other emails, I could see who was doing what, where, and when. And then, of course, the receipt. I asked him for that, and he gave me the receipt to show, it was shipped to this guy, who happens to be a guy that for over 40 years has been publishing about viruses come from outer space. And he's got a tremendous name around the world. Anytime you think of panspermia, you're pretty much going to be, if you look it up, you're going to get back to this guy. He's the guy that pushed the idea, along with Fred Hoyle, was another scientist that he worked with back like 40 years ago or so. Now, so that is roughly what's going on. I will say that Craig has made other claims in terms of hearing voices that need to be thoroughly examined. He at times will hint that he's not of this world. And that's where, in terms of sanity, initially I didn't take him too seriously, but the scientists that he's been associated with are why I take him seriously. So now, and as far as Torah codes go, on slide 17 of what I sent, what you posted, the axis term is Ibrahimi. And let me see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's a 10-letter ELS, which is rare. For people who are not familiar with Torah codes and ELS, it's an equidistant letter skip. In other words, it looks like one letter from, vertically from each letter of the name to the next. It's not. A computer goes through the Torah and finds where the number of letters is equal. In this case, every line and every letter is 7,889 letters apart. So that's the ELS. And now on the top of this matrix, which is astounding, it reads over here, fire and brimstone. Let me pull this up a little bit. Fire and brimstone from the Lord out of heaven. Well, that's, of course, the Sodom and Gomorrah incident being described in the Torah. And most people would think of, okay, fire and brimstone comes from heaven. It must be a meteorite impact of some kind that's talked about over here. So now 2 lines below his name, and just a couple of 3 letters to the left of it, is the soul that eats of it shall bear iniquity. So eating this thing, if it had a virus in it, putting it into his system, putting it into his wife's system, having other people handle it. And some of the pictures I have of the lab there at University of Victoria, while it's normally kept in the sample there is normally kept in a vacuum, I see people handling it with a microscope there, and they're in their bare hands and they're holding the rock that way. And there's no face mask or anything like that. So, this thing had a good chance to start going viral, is the word, is to start spreading from there. So that's on this matrix. On the bottom line of the matrix is Megefa, which is plague. And there are a few other terms of interest here, but in terms of rocks and so forth that are there. UFO is not statistically significant, but it's there. It's skip -1. But the idea that we have, but connecting a rock that basically is coming out of heaven, the fire and brimstone, the meteorite, with eating the thing in this fashion, it's just not to be expected in terms of odds against the total find. Let me see. It's like 4.7 billion to 1, against finding these things this close together. I have another matrix over here where the axis term is stocks went down, and this one has got China at the same skip. It's got Russia at the same skip, and I think they're both behaving kind of, not exactly the best way with everything going on. It's got war over there in the open text by, stocks went down. It's touching an ELS of Wuhan, and then there's panic that's a little bit to the left of that. That's matrix 2. That's slide 19. Again, that's one is against 939,000, 37 to 1 odds. There's another one with Ibrahimi as the axis term. It's the same one as same axis term as before, but I shifted the view around Ibrahimi up to the left to see what was up there. And when I do that, then I see that at the same skip are the two of the words sick and to cure. And Craig's already talked about trying to sell his blood, like people who were infected, but basically as a cure. So that's there. In the open text, he overthrew those cities. A lot of cities having a lot of problems right now, and a lot of cities where nobody's working, and the air is clean for the first time, but people aren't making any money, and they're really worried about what's going on. So that's this matrix, and this one was only against odds of 94,352 to 1. Let me see. The next matrix I posted, Wuhan, China, in the end of days. And the axis term is Wuhan, China. At skip 103,310. Going directly through Wuhan, China, is life that your days will be prolonged. So hopefully our life is prolonged, but the top line is a plague. So in terms of what we got to figure out what we got to do to prolong our lives. So what else does this matrix have on it? Underneath of it is he will die in war. Let me see. Ba'acharit Hayamin is on here in the open text, in the end of days. Also on here, that one is 4 times in Torah the end of days comes up. This is one of them in association with Wuhan, China, and plague, and so forth. They talk about the plague of leprosy in the usual translation, but I just read an article that most rabbis don't think that the plague was leprosy, which wasn't known about until the Middle Ages. So this text is a lot older than that. Let me see what else is here. It seems that it seems to me that this is another line on the same matrix. Seems to me there is a plague in the house. So the Torah talks about both plagues that hit people and plagues that hit their houses. Basically some kind of like fungal infestation or whatever. Next one, the axis term is martial law. Runs into Milley. Skip 2, but Milley.
Yep.
He's the chief of, he's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Next to martial law, 2 lines over in the open text, 2 letters over in the open text is aloof, which is general. And on this one, we have China and Russia overlap each other. Let me see, what's the skip of them? Let me go enter a little further. Rusi is at skip -1, and Sinai is also at skip -1. So, anyway, they're there, and we got to worry about these guys. And and I understand today on the news they had a whole thing out about how 3 countries are putting out this information to sow panic in the United States. Those 3 are China, Russia, and Iran. Have all been involved with this thing, and we can't trust any of them, of course. So that was that one, and the last matrix I put up here. The axis term is Boris Johnson. And on the top, or the second line from the top is Wuhan at skip +1. So the city is named right there. Above that, by the way, is Nephilim, which we've spoken about before. With these ancient folks that interbred with people. Genesis 6:4 is where you find them in the Bible. Then we have, let me see who else is in here. We have Basine in China as a skip -1. And then we have very interesting, right, below Boris Johnson, and I've got a picture of him here looking at Roman gods. In terms of why, and he's recovered, and I'm glad he's recovered. But what's in there in the open text is, it's other gods, and it talks about, and then it says God's anger will kindle against you until you be quickly, he will destroy you quickly. So it turns out that Boris Johnson, although he converted to Catholicism, I guess when he got married again, or he got married, I think he's living with he's living with his girlfriend right now who was pregnant. But Boris Johnson apparently has a thing for Roman and Greek gods. He admires them a lot, and so he really isn't into Christianity. He's really a pagan. And so this is there. I'm glad he's recovering. I like the guy. He reminds me of Trump, which I think he's a great president. This one was against odds of 3,946,981 to 1. So after that, one of the last things the last slide I just mentioned, show a picture here of that says life in space extends beyond viruses. These are puffballs, fungi growing on Mars. And the picture shows 3 days apart on the Opportunity lander. Pictures were taken. On the left, there's 6 whitish balls that are there, and they're a certain size. And then to the right is 3 days later, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Whoops. Wait a minute. There's about 15 balls. Let me go back there. Yeah, 15 of them that were there at that point 3 days later. So they had grown in number and in size, and we had a lot of things. That's what my son and I published about. at the request of the Journal of Astrobiology, they said, hey, write up what you think of this article, Evidence of Life on Mars, and and then we managed to prove it was not what the government thought. The government was using an excuse of hematite, and we showed that that it was uncovered by the wind. We showed there was never enough wind on Mars to move the sand to uncover it, that it had to be growth. So, okay, I've been talking a lot. I've put out the ideas, what's out there. Obviously, the ball is going to be in three courts. It's going to be in the court of Fort Huachuca and U.S. military intelligence. It's going to be in the court of the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense, who I want to see pick up, the dear professor. And if I get my interview with a congressman, then I would hope he would do something. But he's in the House of Representatives, which is controlled by the crazy people. And so they're just going to call him crazy, chances are, when he walks in with this. I would not depend on Nancy Pelosi for anything ever,
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to national defense. She's for tearing this country down and ripping it apart in every way she possibly can. But that's just the way it is. So I really need DOD and UK MOD. I need those guys to do their jobs the right way, defend the country the proper way, and answer this threat in a resounding way that takes us out of the extremist position, I think is what we call it in the Navy when two ships are about to collide, out of the incredible position that we've been placed into. I got a couple minutes to go, and so you got any questions?
Yeah, we got a couple minutes. Larry, you got a question? Yeah, I've got an interesting one because on the one on Boris Johnson he ran, he made a comment, alien origin, Nephilim fallen, virus is alien in nature, and the word Nephilim and Wuhan and there's a numerous Torah codes that Barry has run over a number of months that link all of this together. And my question is, and I'm wearing your tinfoil hat, by the way, Stewart, but my question is, what if, because of the alien nature or the Nephilim fallen nature, and linking to this, whether it's lunar or whether it's Mars or wherever it's from, what if this virus is not like we think it is, maybe not even what China thinks it is? What if, by chance, instead of nanobots we've created, this is something like a smart virus or smart dust in this rock, and it's self-aware, and it's changing?
I think there's an excellent chance that's true. And I say that because it's not just what look like embryos, plural, that are in this thing, but even down to the microscopic level, what the Professor Humphrey was talking about is seeing faces. And frankly, they look like human faces, but it almost is like something out of a really far-fetched science fiction movie or book or whatever, that it may have captured numerous intelligences and somehow combined them. Without examination of the rock the right way, I don't know. But when I said I want a complete physical exam for Craig and his wife, I mean that in the fullest term, right down to RNA, DNA. I want to know whether there's anything in their DNA that is not from this planet, and because he has too many times made comments about not being of this world. And it could be because he's crazy, he's got a big ego, whatever, I don't know. All I know is this guy has got to be thoroughly examined, because there is a question with him of what's going on, in terms of why they would both choose to eat it and mix with bacon and eggs, but I don't know. But it's there's some weird stuff, a lot more weird stuff going on. I've tried to cover it as best I can. Sorry about the opening of the show where we got the feedback. But
no problem.
I think we got the major information out anyway tonight.
Yep. Well, I'm glad you did that because people need to know about this and the possible alien origination of all this. So very, very fascinating.
It's quite possible, but it needs more study. But I'm not getting the answers I need out of the people that have it right now, and obviously. In the case of Wickramasinghe, major crime I think is involved with what that guy has done. and it's got to be
Okay.
addressed.
Well, thank you for coming on, Barry and Larry, and we'll try and have you back. I'll email you, Barry, and we'll maybe can get more done on this. Anyway, thanks a lot, everyone. Yep. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.